Hello, this is Aaron from Workflow 86, and today I'll be showing you how to trigger a workflow in Workflow 86 from a Zap. So this will use our trigger from Zapier component, and what this will essentially allow you to do is to trigger a workflow from any action or any app that is accessible inside of Zapier. So in this case, for example, I am going to trigger a workflow when a message is posted in a certain channel in Slack. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually set up the trigger or the Zap itself in Zapier. So I'm just going to quickly configure this. And so what we want to do is whenever someone posts a message into the learning resources channel in our Slack, it will then trigger this Zap. And so once this trigger has been configured, we can now move back to setting it up on the Workflow 86 side. So on the Workflow 86 side, what you want to do is to drag and drop a trigger from Zapier component in and use that as the trigger for your workflow. So in this case, we're just going to build a really simple workflow where when a Zap gets run, so in this case, when someone posts a message to a channel in Slack, it will then trigger this workflow, which in this case will then send out an email. So we will then go to setting this up. So the first thing that you'll need to do is on the Zapier side, you'll need to look up Workflow 86, and then you'll need to choose the action event, which is trigger a workflow, and then you can click continue. You'll then need to sign into your Workflow 86 account. Now here you want to be sure to sign into the account that is actually running this workflow. So this workflow is running on this account, and this is the account that I signed into. And now we actually set it up. So in Workflow 86 at step 2, you'll see that there's a URL here. And so what you want to do is to copy that URL and paste it in there. Then you'll see that in Zapier, there's another text field for something called a token. And what you'll need to do is to go into Workflow 86 and then click generate token. What this will do is it will generate a security token, which is basically something we use to make sure that we're getting data from the right place and from the right Zap as well. So what you'll need to do is copy and paste this token into here. And you want to treat this token as basically like a security key, or basically like a key into your workflow. So do keep it secure. You'll notice one important thing to note is that when you generate this token in Workflow 86, this is the only time that you'll be able to see it. As soon as you click done, you will not be able to recover this token. And so if you lose the token, if you think the token has been compromised, what you'll need to do is to actually generate a new token and then go back to your workflow, your Zap, and then re-enter it into Zapier again. So that is done. And now we can click next. We can go back to Zapier and actually start configuring what data we want to send from our Zap into Workflow 86. So in this case, we want to send the message, and we also want to send the name, the username of the user who sent that message. And we'll call these the username, and we'll call this the message. Perfect. Alrighty, so now our two screens match up. So in Workflow 86 and in Zapier. And so what we can do in Zapier now is to click test and review, and then we can go back to Workflow 86 and click get sample. And so what will happen is Zapier will send a sample data payload to Workflow 86, and you can see here that these two match up as well, meaning that the sample was correct. Perfect. Now we can go back to Workflow 86 and configure the data that we actually want to send and pass through the rest of the workflow. So in this case, it's very simple. We only got two placeholders, so all we need to do is actually to tick both. We don't need to change the names of the placeholders or anything. I'm happy with calling that this data message and this one username. Alrighty. Now, before we turn on the Zap, there's a very important step which we need to do, which is actually swapping the endpoint URLs. So when we were setting up the action originally, the URL that we're using here is actually the sample endpoint URL. And this is specifically set up to basically configure the steps that we need to do in order to set up the sample, to get the sample from Zapier. Now that we actually want to turn this on, we now need to replace this with this URL, which you get at step 6. And so all you need to do is copy and paste in this new URL before you turn on the Zap. So copy and paste this URL into Zapier, and now you're ready to turn on the Zap. And now that the Zap is on, that's all we need to do on the Zapier side. And on the Workflow 86 side, all we need to do is click finish, and now everything is good to go. Alrighty, and so now we can actually start setting up the rest of our workflow as well. So in this case, I've already set it up, but we can do it again. So what will happen is that when this Zap runs, so when someone posts a message to our channel in Slack, this Zap will run. When that Zap runs, it will then trigger this workflow. And when this workflow is triggered, it will send out this email. So in this case, you can see that we're going to send an email to this email address, and let's reconfigure this message. So we can write this message again using the placeholders from the data that we're getting from Zapier. So let's say someone has posted a new message to the learning channel. We can then specify the message, and we can use the placeholder there, submitted by username. Alrighty, so that will be the email that we will get when this trigger from a Zap actually runs. So now we can publish it, and we are good to go. So again, a summary is that whenever this Zap runs, it will trigger a workflow in Workflow 86. It will pass all the data from that Zap into this workflow as well. And so in this case, it will then send an email to this particular address. All right, now that we've set up this workflow, let's actually run it in a test. So if you recall, this workflow will run when we post a message on Slack. So let's post a message on that Slack channel. And so when that message is posted on Slack, it will then trigger this workflow, which will then send an email to our inbox. And if we go into our inbox and wait for that message to come in, there it is. And so that is an example of how you can trigger a workflow in Workflow 86 from Zapier. Now, of course, this is a really simple example, and you can build it out to something far more complex, but what it really allows you to do is that anything that is available on Zapier as a action, you can now use to trigger a workflow in Workflow 86 as well.